Alright, welcome back to Passion here. So time for the final video in my series ranking F1 qualifiers. Today's video will be drivers 20 to 1st. So these are the all-time best drivers according to my quality model from the year 2002 up till this year. I will kind of give a heads up. 3 rookies from this year's grid actually showed up in the top 20. And I don't think that's necessarily because the model is wrong, but just because of a couple of factors. One, that the data's experience and age corrected, and because the rookies are very inexperienced, very young, it's the model generally looks at what they've done this year, or these 3 rookies in particular, what they've done this year, and it's it ranks them, rates them very, very highly as kind of a future projection of what they, in theory, could be able to do over the course of their entire F1 career, which of course is very exciting. But again, that's something that we'd have to revisit in 2 to 3 years time, where we'd have a much more accurate picture. All right, so starting off with number 20, definitely not a rookie first driver, and that is Jarno Trulli. Quality rating of negative 0.186. For Trulli, definitely a reputation through the 2000s of being a very, very strong qualifier, much stronger qualifier than racer, and hence the nickname the Trulli Train was born sometime in the mid 2000s and perhaps early 2000s as well. But yeah, Trulli generally really good qualifier, out-qualified some very accomplished teammates, including Alonso, Button, and even later in his career was generally much stronger than drivers like Timo Glock, Ralf Schumacher as well. So generally pretty impressive qualifier. And I think of all the drivers from this time period, probably one of the biggest discrepancy between his qualifying performances and his race performances. All right, number 19, Kimi Räikkönen, quality rating of negative 0.214. For Räikkönen, I would say over his entire career, his qualifying performances were kind of all over the place. If you look at McLaren Räikkönen, he probably would easily be in the top 10 on this list. And if you look at, for example, Ferrari Räikkönen, especially the first stint, even the second stint as well, that Räikkönen would have been, probably showed up in a video, a couple videos earlier. So again, it kind of shows that over Räikkönen's career, very up and down in terms of qualifying performance. Makes sense that his qualifying performance was at its best when he was youngest, as that's pretty commonly how it goes. Early mid 20s is generally where drivers peak in qualifying, but it's still over the course of his career, very, very fast driver. And yeah, comes out 19th on my list. Number 18, Mark Webber, a driver who I think was a little bit underrated during his time in F1, especially kind of remembered a lot more first time at Red Bull, which of course was the only time in his career he was really in front running machinery. But for Webber, quality rating of negative 0.223, very, very good qualifier all throughout his career. Pretty much destroyed his first 3 teammates in F1, and Jung, Piazzonia, and Klein. And then again, even after that, still did very well against Nick Heidfeld, Nico Rosberg, and then again, David Coulthard. And it was really only Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull was really the only teammate he really had problems with over one lap. And of course, by that point, been on the older side as well, which certainly doesn't help. But still, I think really good qualifier, and ends up 18th on this list. All right, now number 17 is our first of the 3 rookies, and again, if you skipped my qualifier, I'm not going to bother saying it again. But for Hadjar, quality rating of negative 0.235, I think he's done a pretty good job in his first half season F1. One thing I will say though is that again, his benchmark for qualifying this year has predominantly been Liam Lawson, who again, depending on your definition of rookie, is also a rookie. And that can sometimes make fair evaluation difficult. When, for example, looking at Mick Schumacher, he looked really good up against Nikita Mazepin, a fellow rookie, but then the following year, up against Kevin Magnussen, things changed quite a bit. The perspective, I think, changed quite a bit. So, for example, if Hadjar were to be teammates with Max Verstappen next year, which I think is a possibility, that rating could very easily change. But for Hadjar, honestly, he's looked quality gap compared to Lawson is very similar to what Tsunoda achieved during a time period where Lawson was also more inexperienced, and also Hadjar's a lot less experienced than Tsunoda was during his time paired up with Lawson. So again, both those counts does look pretty promising for Hadjar, and 17th on this list, definitely a very good spot to go. B, obviously very small sample size, and this is a rating that could easily change even over the next 4 to 5 months. All right, number 16 is Valtteri Bottas, quality rating of negative 0.282. A bit similar to Jarno Trulli, definitely a guy who has a bit of a reputation for being a better qualifier than racer. Again, some pretty good years there at Mercedes. Gave Hamilton, a challenge at times, especially over one lap. Got a fair share of pole positions. Did get, I think, 10 wins, but again, focus of today's video is pole positions. Did get his fair share of pole positions. And again, even before that, did a pretty good job at Williams against Felipe Massa. And again, at Alfa Romeo, up against a teammate who's a bit of an unknown quantity in Joe. I thought generally did a pretty good job in qualifying there. It'll be interesting to see if he gets a seat in F1 for 2026. It'll be interesting to see, one, if he gets in, and again, how his performance, particularly qualifying performance, holds up, as he approaches his mid-late 30s. All right, number 15. This is Robert Kubica's first F1 career, so again from 2006 to 2010, not counting his 2019 comeback. Quality rating of negative 0.313. Kubica generally very, very strong qualifier. I think only the one pole position in his career, and that was at the 2008 Bahrain Grand Prix, I believe. Pretty good during his time at BMW, but again, that entire time at BMW was during refueling era. So it meant that, strategy would play a role in, what you would do at the end of Q3 in qualifying. And so again, it's harder to say, with exact certainty how much better or worse he was than Nick Heidfeld. Generally, I would say better of the two, especially as, Kubica kind of developed and got better his third and fourth year in the series. But 2010 absolutely demolished Vitaly Petrov in his rookie season. Looked very, very good there. And then, of course, it's really a question of what could have been, as, he, of course, had that rally accident before the 2011 season. And again, rumored to have that pre-contract with Ferrari for 2012. Would have been really interesting to see him and Alonso, fighting for the title that year along with Vettel. I honestly think they just would have canceled each other out and would have just handed the title to Vettel. But nonetheless, still really, really promising career for Kubica. And again, a bit similar to Bianchi, but, obviously a little bit different in the sense that, there's a lot of, unfulfilled potential there with Kubica. All right, number 14 is Carlos Sainz. Bit of a surprise to see Sainz this high, but quality rating of negative 0.315. For Sainz, I would say his best stint in terms of qualifying in F1 were his stints at McLaren against Norris and his stints at Ferrari against Leclerc. Generally did very, very well in both of those situations. And even, early in his career, I think Verstappen aside, it was very, very close between himself and Verstappen. Obviously, there was a massive age and experience gap there at the time. Verstappen being 17 and only having one season of single-seaters of experience at that time. But against Kvyat, did very, very well there. Again, I'd just say his only real bad season in qualifying was 2018 against Hülkenberg, and then arguably this year against Albon. Now, of course, as he enters his 30s, it's possibility that his quality performance will kind of start to deteriorate. And even though this does kind of this model does correct for that, that natural decline, some drivers generally will, decline faster than others, and those kind of who have that, absolute talent ceiling, your Hamiltons, Alonso's, Verstappens, will generally age at a much more graceful way than generally drivers who I would say are at, Sainz's stature. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But generally, I think pretty accomplished qualifier and a little bit underrated as well. All right, number 13 is George Russell. Quality rating of negative 0.320. For Russell, excellent qualifier, of course, during his time at Williams, got the reputation of Mr. Saturday. I do think a lot of that reputation is down to the fact that he had some pretty abysmal teammates his first 3 seasons in F1. If you look at where Latifi and Kubica both ranked on this list, Latifi, I think, ranked 100th, and Kubica, or at least Robert Kubica too, as I coded it, was ranked somewhere in the 110s, somewhere around there. So again, having 2 very, very weak teammates, I think, did make his early seasons look a little bit better than they actually were. But nonetheless, time at Mercedes still very impressive. Basically, every single year at Mercedes got larger margin over Hamilton, or basically improved his margin over Hamilton in qualifying. And again, part of that's down to kind of Hamilton getting a bit older as well. But nonetheless, still doing, I think, a really good job over one lap. I do have him a little bit below some of the other kind of elite drivers in F1 right now that, of course, have yet to come. But still, very good job by Russell overall, and excited to see what he can do in the coming seasons. All right, number 12, interestingly enough, is actually his teammate, Kimi Antonelli. Quality rating of negative 0.342. Now, for Antonelli, of course, he is 18 years of age, and judging him based on what he's doing at 18 is not a very fair reflection of what he's going to be able to do when he's 24, 25. And of course, a lot more experience. So for Antonelli, because of the corrections for age and experience that the model puts on the performance, on basically the numbers that the raw numbers that are produced for the season, for each season, it does have Antonelli being 12th. So again, that is, I'd say, interesting spot for him to be. Interesting how that has him ahead of his current teammate Russell. I would say just on his performance that he's shown thus far, I think the absolute ceiling, I think there is some questions there. I think he's never really, outside of that Miami sprint qualifying performance where he got pole position, those kinds of sparks of performance that we saw from Verstappen very early on haven't really been as prevalent this year. Again, it does suggest that he's maybe lacking a little bit of confidence in the car, not able to push at 100%. I would say also maybe perhaps some lingering doubts, confidence issues related to that FP1 crash they had at Monza last year, where he basically crashed on his first flying lap, and whether he's basically consistently always driving at 98, 99%, never at 100% like all the other drivers are, when the car's on the ragged edge at the end of Q3. But again, it'll be interesting to see how Antonelli develops over the coming years, and we see how this number develops and how it changes over time. All right, number 11, another rookie, final rookie on the list, Gabriele Bortoleto, quality rating of negative 0.366. I think doing a really good job in the Sauber. He's as of the recording of this video, he's winning the teammate head-to-head against a pretty accomplished driver, Nico Hülkenberg. And this is not Hülkenberg, who's been particularly slow the last couple of years. Basically did a fair beating on Kevin Magnussen the last couple of years. And again, so the fact that he's able to come in his rookie season, do a pretty good job against a Hülkenberg does show that I think, Bortoleto is a really special talent. And again, age correction, experience correction puts him 11th on the list. So again, really, really high expectations for him going forward. Now, into the top of 10 we go, and number 10 is Oscar Piastri, quality rating of negative 0.379. I think for Piastri, there were a lot of question marks about his qualifying performance, especially last year. I think a lot of people were reading way too much into the direct qualifying head-to-head, where I think it was like 20-4 or something in Lando Norris's favor, and they were really ignoring the fact that the raw gaps between himself and Norris were very, very small, and the median qualifying delta was under 1/10 of a second. And now this year, Piastri's done a very good job, basically been dead even, almost even slightly better, I would argue, compared to Norris over one lap this season. And I think a lot of people are quite surprised by that, but to be honest, for me, I'm not that surprised. But for Piastri, generally, he's progressed year on year, very, very good job. And while I think, at this point, he's probably pretty close to his peak in terms of qualifying performance, he's in his third year. He's in his mid-20s. Again, 10th spot, still a pretty good spot to be. Not, the absolute best, but still definitely one of the best drivers since the year 2000. Okay, number 9 is Fernando Alonso. Maybe a bit of a surprise to see him this low, but I think kind of the opposite of Mark Webber, the opposite of Jarno Trulli or Valtteri Bottas. Alonso's always been a driver who's been known for his great abilities on Sunday and not necessarily absolutely fantastic one-lap speed. That being said, 9th is still a really good spot to be in for Alonso, quality rating of negative 0.391. Generally, he's done a very, very good job against pretty much all of his teammates. Out-qualified every teammate he's had. I'd say going back to Hamilton, I think Hamilton, between himself and Hamilton, very, very close. It was almost dead even between the two of them. I think got out-qualified by Trulli his first year at Renault. I think that was 2003 as well. But besides that, really he's basically destroyed every teammate he's had over, one lap, quality, race pace, you name it. And so, yeah, for Alonso, 9th is a pretty good spot on this list. All right, number 8 is Nico Rosberg, quality rating of negative 0.408. For Rosberg, I do think a bit overshadowed by the fact that he was Hamilton's teammate for 3 years, but I think of all the teammates that Hamilton had, when you take into account the fact that, this was basically Hamilton's peak, or very close to his peak in terms of one lap pace, the fact that Rosberg was so close and even out-qualified him 1 year showed that, Rosberg was in himself a very, very good qualifier. And I think, again, got quite a few pole positions. And, if I think there was a lot of, question marks about, Schumacher when he came back. And I think some people were like, well, is Rosberg basically just a good but not great driver? And, Schumacher's performing pretty poorly. But then, when Rosberg and Hamilton became teammates, I think people very quickly realized, just how good Rosberg was of a qualifier. So comes out 8th on my ranking. All right, number 7 is Sebastian Vettel, quality rating of negative 0.412 for Vettel. I think his quality pace was very hit and miss. There was times early in his career where his qualifying pace was absolutely fantastic. Basically, his entire Red Bull stint prior to 2014. Of course, new regulations came in the turbo hybrid cars. 2014, a bit of a misadventure. Never really got along with the cars. Went to Ferrari, had pretty good performances, but when you directly compare those performances to, Alonso's against Raikkonen in 2014, it did leave perhaps a little bit to be desired, but some of that could perhaps be down to the fact that Raikkonen just did not get along with the 2014 Ferrari. But that being said, for Vettel, I think, quality performances were always very, very good, I would say. But, towards the end, I would say 2019 onwards, he was kind of shown up by Leclerc. Leclerc kind of came in right away and was, right away the faster driver over one lap. And then 2021, 2022, I think, he was definitely past his best at that point. Qualifying between himself and Stroll was much closer than it should have been. And when you compare directly with Stroll's next teammate, Alonso, obviously, you could see a pretty big difference there, and suggest that at least later in their careers, Alonso was generally performing at a much higher level. So it does generally suggest, I think, Vettel's peaks in terms of one lap pace, very, very high. Easily could have been one of the top 3 or 4 drivers if you look at just the peaks, but unfortunately the valleys were pretty high, were to a plenty, I would say, and that contributed to Vettel only being 7th on this list. Okay, so now into the top 6 we go. And number 6 is Lando Norris. So for Norris, quality rating of negative 0.482. Very, very formidable qualifier. One lap pace I don't think has ever been his issue. Did a very good job his first 2 years up against Carlos Sainz. Again, was not the faster of the two, but again, given the fact that he was so much younger and less experienced in science, made sense. Basically destroyed Ricardo in qualifying there, and then even then has generally had the measure of Piastri, but that gap's obviously come down the last couple of years. Even though I think Norris has obviously taken his fair share of flack, criticism for some of his Sunday performances, especially last year and at times this year. I don't think the qualifying pace has ever been an issue. And so for Norris, I think he's generally, through his still pretty short career, shown very, very good qualifying pace and shown he's one of the best drivers on the grid in that regard. All right, number 5 is Mika Hakkinen, quality rating of negative 0.493. Now, of course, for Hakkinen, only 2 years in this time period, 2000, 2001, retired relatively early at the age of 32, I believe. And so you only really have a data size, sample size of those 2 years. And, he was still performing at a very high level in the McLaren that year. Generally had the measure of David Coulthard over one lap. And so Hakkinen 5th on the list. Now, number 4, a bit of a surprise perhaps for some, but Lewis Hamilton is 4th on this list. Quality rating of negative 0.511 for Hamilton. Of course, statistically, just in terms of raw statistics, the best qualifier of all time with the most pole positions in F1 history. But again, taken into account his performances, teammates, the quality of the cars that he had, again, he does only come out 4th on my list. But that being said, Hamilton, very, very good career for pretty much his entire career. Very, very consistent in terms of one lap performance, regardless of what car he drove. Very good performances in qualifying, with, I would say, the exception of these last 3 or 4 years, the ground effect era. Definitely, I would say, a step back compared to where he was prior to that. And even then, I would say Hamilton's qualifying peak was really, you could argue his qualifying peak was from like 2009 when he was getting poles in cars that were not very good. All the way up to 2018, I would say that Singapore qualifying pole lap was probably that last lap where it felt like Hamilton just took the grabbed pole out of the bag in a car that wasn't really supposed to be on pole. And obviously from there on, 2018 to 2021, still very, very good qualifier, but not at his all-time best. And then with the ground effect cars, just, hasn't really been able to adapt to the cars that well as some of the other drivers, younger drivers. But still at this point, he's in his 40s. Very understandable that one lap pace would be naturally declining over time. Okay, so number three on the list is Charles Leclerc, quality rating of negative 0.531. For Leclerc, from basically, I would say, halfway to maybe a quarter of the way through his first season F1, Leclerc had a reputation for being an excellent qualifier, and that reputation was kind of solidified 2019, his first year at Ferrari, where he got, I think, 7 pole positions that season. 2020, of course, dominates Vettel. And then from 2021 to 2024, you had this odd period where it felt like Sainz was much closer to him in terms of one lap pace than he probably should have been. I think many people prior to Sainz joining Ferrari were expecting him to basically destroy him in the same way that he had destroyed Vettel. But I think, many people were a bit surprised that the quality deficit was smaller than expected. I'm not trying to say that's a knock against Leclerc, but I do think it's one of those things that was interesting to note. Generally, this season against Hamilton's been pretty good. Definitely been the better of the two drivers. But when Hamilton's 40 years of age, that is something that you generally would expect. That being said, Leclerc, one of the best drivers over this past quarter century in terms of qualifying performance, but not the best driver on the current grid, I would say, and what the model says as well. Now, of course, number 2 is Michael Schumacher, and this is Michael Schumacher from 2000 to 2006, quality rating of negative 0.538. For Schumacher, of course, very, very strong performances in qualifying up against the two teammates I had, Rubens Barrichello and Felipe Massa. Now, of course, a large portion of this time period was refueling era, so there was some a bit of a discrepancy there in between, actual raw one lap pace and what the results actually said. But still, the analysis says that, Schumacher was an excellent qualifier and again, second best over that time period. Now, I'm sure if I included Schumacher's results from the 90s, which probably given that he was younger in his 20s, it's possible that the rating would be even higher than it was before. And given that, I think many people who watched, Schumacher at the time, they often say that prior to his Silverstone accident in 1999, that he was actually much quicker before the accident than he was after, despite the fact that he got the bulk of his world titles after the accident. Does suggest Schumacher one hell of a driver, and again, many people consider him to be the best for good reason. Now, the driver ranked first on the list, and I think many people probably guessed already who this driver is, but it is none other than Max Verstappen. Quality rating of negative 0.581 for Verstappen. I believe he's currently tied for third, or third, I think, in his own right on the all-time list for pole positions. Now, of course, for Verstappen, he's basically destroyed every teammate he's had over one lap since going back to his time against Daniel Ricciardo, and even then, over his almost 3 years as teammates against Ricciardo, that quality gap was getting bigger and bigger in his favor every single year. And even first year, very, very impressive what he was able to do as a 17-year-old going up against a pretty experienced and pretty accomplished in the junior categories, Carlos Sainz. And so again, the rating does, my quality model does have Max Verstappen as the best driver in qualifying over one lap since the year 2000. So that's the end to this series, analyzing all 125 drivers who qualified for this. Again, quite a bit of a long series. I know the views have not been great, but I enjoy making videos. I enjoy talking about the drivers. So again, if you stuck around all the way through 125 drivers, thank you so much for watching. And that is all. So goodbye.